Welcome to the Making of Me podcast, where we dive into stories of resilience, courage, and the power of human connection. Today's guest is about DeLena, a father, author, and adventurer who's journeying with his son, Ryan, redefine what it means to trust instinct, define conventional wisdom, and find healing through adventure. Robert's co-author Without Restraint, chronicling Ryan's experience navigating therapeutic school and discovering freedom through scaling. Together, they also created the documentary 91 following Ryan's quest to skill all 91 backcountry runs in the Presidential Mountain Range. It's really a pleasure and honor having you on the show, Robert.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. So, Robert, can you share the moment you first took Ryan scaling and how it changed your perspective on his potential?
So prior to that point, Ryan was a difficult kid. He was a fun kid to parent, but he just didn't listen. And when he went to schools, particularly American public schools, they didn't know what to do with him. So they had pushed him out of the system into these really terrible therapeutic schools where he was restrained physically a lot and isolated whenever he acted up. And so we had this kid that was really a mess and, used to try to find things that he liked to do outside of school to try to keep him busy. And it really never worked. Everything we tried, I could never find anything that clicked.
Yeah,
And then we live near this little ski hill. I live in Massachusetts, which is a colder part of America, and we get quite a bit of snow. And this little hill, I just drove by one day and I don't know what made me go. I honestly don't. I just drove there and in the hopes of, killing an hour or two just to get him out of the house. And that day, I just saw a different kid. I saw him do an activity that he liked and where he was rewarded for, being a risk taker and maybe not listening a little bit. Like
yeah,
skiers are kind of those sort of people who, they don't really fit in. They are willing to take chances. And I don't know, it's something clicked that day. And we went back the next day, and then we started to travel all around New England, which has some smaller mountains. And then we eventually went out in the western part of the U.S., some bigger mountains, and then we started to travel the world. And I just had a much different kid than everybody else was seeing, and I was
yeah.
able to take that experience back to those schools and say, hey, maybe you're wrong about this kid. And even take him back to my own home, where my wife was, not so sure that I was seeing this different picture, but it really was. I mean, he was just a different kid when he was outside in the fresh air and able to be himself.
Wow, that was really lovely being that. Yeah, you were able to find out that he was able to be himself when he's outside or compared to when he's out. Yeah, indoor, and that was really lovely. So, what was it like navigating the advice of doctors and educators while advocating for Ryan's independence?
That's a good question. I mean, so my wife and I were lawyers, and we're pretty educated people. But when it came time to sort of go up against the doctors, we were intimidated because
Yeah,
particularly where we live in the United States, our part of the country, there's Harvard, you've probably heard of, and there's some really top schools. And a lot of these doctors came out of these top universities, and you walk into their office, and their diplomas are all on the back of the
yeah,
wall. They've written books on parenting, and on kids with issues. I think our initial reaction was they must know more than we do because we were first time parents, and we were lawyers, like we said. What do we know about treatment of children or medicine or behavioral modification systems? And even when it came up going up into the schools, I mean, a lot of these educators in these schools, these special schools, they had been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, and had a history of success with some kids. And they never tell you about the failures. And what
yeah,
I did in that instance is I ignored my instinct, because my instinct right away, when they talked about putting their hands on him when he acted up, and they described it as a hug. They would hug him when he became unruly, basically. But what they were doing was they were using that, as a method of control, right? Whenever they thought he was going to act up, they were putting their hands on him. And so right away I was skeptical, but again, I just ignored my instincts, and I said, well, they must know more than I do. And it really took the evidence right in front of me over a period of years where I just saw this different kid when we were alone skiing and we were traveling, and I had a kid that I was getting on airplanes with, and we were going all over the place to ski and going into hotels and restaurants. Yet when he was in the schools, he wasn't allowed to go to the water fountain or the bathroom without an aide trailing him behind him, and so
yeah,
it was really just two different kids almost. And I kept saying to myself, well, if I can just find activities that are like skiing, and bring those back, I'll be okay. And what I didn't realize was I needed to just get Ryan out of the system we were in
yeah.
and putting him in situations like skiing where he was free to be himself.
Yeah, that was really amazing. Being that at first you ignore your instinct, but later you still get about buy into it again or into looking at him every now and then. You see that he thrives more when he's in the outdoor compared to when he's indoor. And that was really amazing. So, how this scaling became a tool for real emotional well-being.
Well, I mean, in school, what we saw was, I don't know if PTSD is a term we hear here, is a post-traumatic stress disorder. So when you have somebody who, every time something's going wrong or about to go wrong, they're gonna get hit. And I'm gonna use hit.
Yeah,
He wasn't hit, but he was gonna have hands put on him. He started to have this fight or flight response that anytime he sensed that he may have done something wrong, he would try to flee the situation. He didn't want to get tackled into a hallway. And it's funny, the school would look at that and say, well, he must be, crazy. I'll use that term loosely because he's running away from our help. And I would say to them, it's not really help. You're tackling him. Any normal person would not want that to happen.
yeah,
So he's acting like everybody else would act, and you're signing this sort of value judgment on that decision as if he knows being tackled is a good thing. Like it goes against everything, every fiber of your being. If somebody's gonna touch you, hurt you, you're gonna try to evade all that. And I don't know. We just got in this loop with the schools where once he was in a school like that, our own public school, which couldn't restrain you, public schools here typically don't do that, wouldn't take him back because they looked at his record and they said, well, how can we take him back? He's been restrained hundreds of times. And I would say to them, because they can restrain him. Like if they couldn't
yeah.
restrain him, none of that would have happened. If you just put him back in an environment where you can't restrain him, you're going to see a different kid, because I saw a different kid on the mountain. One of the interesting things about skiing for me was he was so much better than I was, and he could just ski away from me anytime we had any conflict. So I couldn't contain him. I couldn't tell him what to do. He was in charge. Honestly, he got to the point where he was so much better than me, and he was putting me in positions where I was in over my head as a skier and I was going to get killed. He was responsible for me. He was like, he had to make
Yeah,
decisions to keep his dad alive. And I saw this kid making really good, decisions
yeah.
and thoughtful decisions. And I just could never convey that to the schools. And I think, and that was the big issue.
Wow, that was really a whole lot. Being that, yeah, out there you could actually more like you could hardly more like catch up with him compared to indoors. They're saying in different stories. Like the conflict must have really, really been much for you and to handle. And so, did you ever regret the heavy medication or intervention Ryan received earlier on?
Do I regret it? So he said, oh God, yeah. No, I have tons of guilt. I mean, we wrote this book together called Without Restraint, and in the book we wrote separately. So I wrote basically my recollections of everything that happened, and he wrote his recollections of everything that happened, and then we folded them together into the book. And I had to process all of that. I had to, and I really looked at my own behavior and thought, what contributed to my decision to allow the things that happened to Ryan? And I had to assess, what was it about having this kid that was imperfect, right? That he wouldn't listen. He was hard for schools to deal with. All of a sudden, I had this kid that I thought was going to be a superstar, and the schools are coming home saying, he can't even go to school here. He's so difficult. And that my insecurity or whatever it was that played into that allowed me to say, okay, here doctor, here school, you fix him, I know he's broken, instead of saying he's not broken, he's just different.
Yeah,
And so I had to really work through a lot of that, and I think writing the book helped to say, those decisions said more about me than it did about him, right? And I have to kind of come to terms with that, to say, you know what's so bad about difference, right? It's not what he was just different than the other kids. He wasn't a bad kid. And then as he started to really excel as a skier and become, this sort of well-known outdoorsman and become, somewhat famous in his own little world, I think I was able to see him in a different light. But I still always had that guilt over what I had done to him when he was young. And luckily, he didn't really harbor a whole lot of resentment. He looks at his parents and said, he's a pretty open-minded kid, and he just thinks we were doing our best. We made some mistakes. We corrected those mistakes, luckily, in time.
wow.
And he doesn't really hold any ill will. But it was hard to kind of process, for sure.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Also, how did your roles as a parent evolve while supporting a unique child in a system built for conformity?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think, it's so I have a daughter who's what I call typically developing, right? That she was sort of the normal kid. And, I think I did parent them differently. Ryan, I got to the point where things were so hard for him and he was so hard on himself and he was always in turmoil. I kind of gave him more freedom. And my daughter, in some ways, was the kid that I always expected to have, right? She was smart, she got good grades, she was a good athlete. And I stayed tough on her. I didn't give her a lot of room
Yeah.
to run with because I just looked at her and said, "You have all these advantages. You should be excelling at this stuff." And I think I probably did maybe make mistakes with her where I should have been more positive in my praise when she did things right and less critical when she did things wrong. But it wasn't as easy to take the lessons I learned from Ryan and apply them
Yeah.
to her. And it's funny when you just have two different kids in two different places and you can be two different kinds of parents. So I think I tried to learn, and when you have a kid who struggles and really all your goal is in the next 15 minutes is that they be happy, and like that they're not that you want to spoil them and give them everything, but you want to help them find a life that
Yeah.
makes them filled, right? And not one that they're living because of your expectations. I wouldn't want my daughter to become a doctor or a lawyer because I wanted her to be. I wanted her to find something that she loves and is passionate about. Because I know I've worked with enough people and known enough people who are in careers they don't like, and I don't care how successful they are. It's a lousy way to go through life. So I really want her to have the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them and not be judged. But I do every once in a while I find myself in
Yeah.
that role of being
Yeah.
critical and it like I was raised. I mean, my parents the way they raised me, and so I think every parent's expectations is that your kids will do better than you did, right? And so the bar is raised pretty high. My wife and I, we grew up kind of, blue collar, hard work. Our parents are not wealthy, and we've done pretty well. And you just expect your kids to do twice as well as you did. And so it puts a lot of pressure, I think, on kids. That generation, I think, can have it kind of tough. So
Yeah.
I
For
try to
sure.
avoid those pitfalls. I can't promise that I always have, though.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, advice. I think it's really lovely, and the fact that it has evolved over time, and yeah, you know how see better with actually engaging things compared to growing up being a blue collar, growing up in a blue collar home, a whole lot of expectation, and now things are different, and the expectations for the children is totally different. It's really amazing. So, what lessons did you learn about trusting your instinct over the advice of experts?
I think that's. I mean, so when I get asked, I get a lot of outreach from parents. They'll read the book and they'll find me online, and I'll get an email saying, "Hey, my son is really struggling. He's in the school. I think it's a bad fit, and here's his issues." And in a lot of ways, they're asking me to play the role that I rejected. I don't want people to think that someone else is going to cure those problems. So I bring it back to those parents and I say, well, number one, you know your kid better than anybody.
Yeah,
I don't care how many degrees or how many books somebody's written. A lot of times you walk into those offices, the doctor meets with you for 15 minutes and makes a medication decision or change in your life that's going to impact everything. And the second you walk out of that office, they never think about you again, right? The next patient walks in. So I tell those people really just, if it doesn't feel right, it's not right. And really, believe in yourself and believe that you know your kid better than anything. The second part I think I try to stress on people, Ryan found skiing in the outdoors, and that was a game changer for us because as hard as his life was, and he describes this in the book, he was in these terrible schools 5 days a week, and it took until he was in high school to get out of there. But then he always knew on Saturdays and Sundays we were going to go skiing. He had this one thing to look forward to. Even in his darkest moments, there was always that glimmer of light that there was something that he could look forward to. And a lot of these kids that even if they're somewhat typical, especially in America right now, social media, and it's probably the same in Nigeria. It's hard, I think, for that generation. They just see this world online that's better than the world they're in. Think
yeah,
that things are darker than they are, or they can't achieve how good it is somewhere else. And there's a lot of sadness in that age group. So and anxiety. So I think if they have something outside of that they're passionate about, and it can be anything. It could be music. It could be
yeah,
acting. It could be whatever, art. They just have to have something that they feel they're good at when they compare themselves to other people. And they don't have to be the best at it, but they just have to
yeah,
feel like that. And so
yeah.
I
So
try to
true.
talk to parents. I can't cure everything. I mean, some of these kids really are in a position where, maybe only medication can help or mainly, therapy can help. But I'd like to see them just try, a different approach and really trust their instincts. And so it's hard. It's hard here because the system really funnels you into these special schools the second your kid acts out, and especially when it's behavioral. If your kid's slower or developmentally delayed, our schools are really good. They're really good at helping those kind of kids. If it's behavioral and you're disruptive, they don't know what to do with you.
Yeah, 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 amazing. And I think it's really your skill, especially when you make reference of them having something to do outside school, which if it comes to more like a physical skill and Yeah, that's usually more like empower most times, being that it's to reduce their anxiety and yeah, give them the kind of a sense of confident that they could actually excel in something outside the walls of the school. And yeah, it's really
Yeah, no,
amazing. Yeah,
yeah, and even just to teach them that the tolerance for, life is hard sometimes, right? It's
yeah,
okay to struggle. That it's not going to always be easy. And I think, you're a young guy. Your parents probably, had dealt with this, and my generation certainly did. This is, and you as well. But like the younger generation under that next one, I don't know. They don't have any tolerance for discomfort,
yeah,
and
such
when
a
things aren't easy, they just quit, and it's a bad lesson, I think. So
yeah,
hopefully
such a
resiliency is the word we use here a lot. A little resilience
yeah,
where you fall down, you get back up, and you move.
yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. So, how did your own growth as a as a skier and adventurer influence Ryan's journey and confidence?
So that's the funny part to the story. It really didn't because I wasn't any of those things. I was just a guy, sitting on the couch, watching, sports and, having
Yeah,
friends and whatever. And all of a sudden I had this kid that really, here team sports are so big, right? The kids get funneled into soccer pretty quick and American football and baseball and basketball, and, and in a way that becomes your whole life as a parent, right? Your kid picks the sport they love the best. They're on these club teams, they travel, you're going to games. That's what I thought my life was going to look like. I played baseball in college. My wife played lacrosse and field hockey. I just assumed Ryan was going to play college something. He
yeah,
was going to pick. And when he didn't have those things, and we were forced to find skiing, I had skied a couple times as a kid, but I wasn't a skier. And so the day we went, we both were beginners. And I was, at that moment a little better than he was because I had done it a couple times. But within 2 or 3 times on skis, he was way better than I was. And so
mm,
I was forced to be this guy following him around the mountain, knowing he was too young to be there alone, but also like just being fearful of my own life sometimes. Like I would get on
yeah,
the I was like, all right, either I'm gonna tear my knee up and then this whole thing's gonna come to an end, or I'm gonna really get hurt. So I had to find a way to navigate that. And there were some times where I just had to let him go and say, Ryan, I can't do this one. Like I'm gonna do the old man. I'll meet you at the bottom. And I remember standing at the bottom sometimes, and I would look up and like, all right, if he doesn't come down
yeah,
in one more minute, I'm gonna have to call the police. Like, where
yeah,
is he? He would always show up, and I would say,
yeah,
all right, next. So yeah, so it really did. I think if I had been more open to the outdoors, I always regret. Like we have this thing called the Boy Scouts, where kids learn like camp and like hike
yeah,
and go out in the woods and learn what berries they can eat and stuff. It's survival skills. I just wasn't into that. I really
yeah,
wasn't like outside getting bitten by bugs and sleeping on a tent on the ground. And I think he would have liked that. And so I sort
yeah,
of wish I had picked something more that he liked and not something that I liked. And so that's another parenting thing. But it all worked
yeah,
out.
yeah, amazing, amazing. Also, how do you balance pushing for achievement while protecting emotional well-being?
That's a tough one. I mean, I do think being driven is a good skill. I think it is. And I think parents should push you a little bit, right? You should always want to please your parents ultimately. I just don't think it should be the only thing that matters. You should want to please yourself. And I think if parents can teach that to their kids that, at the end of the day, you've got to be happy with yourself. No relationship is going to bring that on. No activity, no job. It's got to come to the point where you've chosen things you like and you feel good about yourself. And I think Ryan was so driven, part of it, the easy part of parenting him was once he found this, his goal was to ski every possible place on earth, right? And to just go where
Yeah,
nobody had been before. And part of the documentary you mentioned, like where we live, probably a lot of your audience doesn't ski, but in ski resorts, they typically have a chairlift that takes you to the top and you ski down within the confines of a defined area. Backcountry skiing is you go by yourself. You climb up the mountain yourself and you ski down yourself. And there are places in New England where people typically do that a lot, and then there are places where people typically do that very little. A lot has to go right, it has to have the right condition, weather has to be good, it has to be safe. And you have to make those determinations after a long climb up. You climb for 6 hours, now you're staring down the thing saying, I don't think this is right
yeah,
today, let's go do something else. And it's really hard to make those decisions. So he's learned a lot of that just because he wanted to check off each one. And he's the first person to do all 91 of them where we live, and that was kind of a great accomplishment. That didn't come from me. I never proposed that. I never told him
Yeah.
to do that. I would have told him not to do that because it's dangerous. But
Yeah.
he did it anyway. So it's that's him. That's Ryan. So it's my daughter. Honestly, is someone I feel like I have to push. She's kind of content to just be okay. Like life, as long as life is okay, she's good. And I'm like, hey, you want your life to be great? Like, do the next thing. And so it's a hard balance. I think it's not easy
Yeah.
sometimes.
So true. So true. Wow. That's really amazing. So lastly, looking back, what has been the most rewarding part of your journey with Ryan?
I think seeing where he is now. I mean, I so right now we're at the point where he makes a lot of these. If you look him up, Ryan DeLena, DeLena on YouTube, you can see a lot of his content. He puts a lot of content out on YouTube, and we were in Canada. Canada's a country north of the U.S., right? So Canada, like we're in a separate country, in line to go skiing, and people will recognize him and say, "Hey, Ryan, I watch your videos. I really love your content. It's really great." And I'm like, this is amazing. Like you're wearing goggles on. They can't see
Yeah.
your face. They know who you are. And we've had that happen in Japan and like crazy places where people come up to him and talk about how much they like his content, and not that they just recognize him like a famous person. They're watching the videos and they're getting something out of it. They're getting
Yeah.
the lessons he's trying to teach them about making good choices out in the backcountry is impactful. And so to see the impact he's having on this next generation of skiers and even grown men and women that come up to him, it's kind of cool to see that he's known for something that's really that positive. And I think a lot of these people now, once they follow him, start to dive into his backstory a little bit, and then they
Yeah.
see the movie, read the book, and they think, "Geez, this kid really came out of a dark place to be this
Yeah.
guy. Wow, that's really cool." So that's pretty awesome as a dad to see that.
Yeah, so true. I mean, I think the desire of every dad is the fact that their son, their daughter are doing absolutely very well for themselves, and yeah, outside their influence, and it's really amazing. So, what advice will you give to parents? You give to parents of children who are struggling with our traditional educational or behavioral system?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the schools, a lot of the advice and a lot of the decisions that come out of the schools, remember, are designed to make the school's life easier. They're not necessarily designed to help. So when the school is telling you, hey, we want to push you into this other program, or we want to have your kid be in this special classroom, make sure it's to their benefit. And it's not just because there's some teacher saying, hey, I have 30 kids and this kid's a pain in the butt. I really got to get him out of the classroom, and make sure, force them to do their jobs, right? And then, and then judge each action over time. If you don't see progress or you see regression, stop it. Just say, this isn't working. I want to try
Yeah,
something else. And really, again, trust your instincts on that. It's pretty easy if you can see whether your child is struggling or not, or if it's helping or not. And sometimes it's just so obvious, it's easy to miss. You come home from work, you're busy, you don't really want to think about this stuff. But if you can tell, like, how happy or sad somebody is, it's pretty obvious when they're young. And listen to them. Ryan was young, and when Ryan would come home from the therapeutic school and say, "Hey, they tried to choke me, they tried to kill me, they had me on the floor," we just thought he was exaggerating because he was 4 and 5 years old. But in his mind was they were trying to kill him, and that was something we sort of missed because we just thought, well, obviously they're not trying to kill him. This doesn't happen in this country, in this state. Like, people don't teachers don't try to kill kids. But if you're 4 years old and someone's laying on top of you, in your mind, that's what's going on, and that's we
yeah,
should have listened to his version of the events, not just the school's version of the events.
yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much. And it's really amazing with the work you're doing. With what you're putting out, you and Arian, and actually more like, yeah, actually changing the whole of perspective because a whole lot of parents now get to believe on or what their sons and daughters could do differently, despite something that might look like disability from the start. Yeah, could actually look like something they could actually do or engage better compared to what their former perspective might look like. Yeah, it's really amazing. Thanks for what you do. So Robert, from our
Appreciate you
audience,
sharing the story. Thank you so much for helping to share it. It's a good
yeah,
story.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. So, Robert, from our audience who would love to connect with you, reach out, connect with you, and even that of your son, how can they reach out to you and where's the best platform?
Sure. So the book is called Without Restraint. It's available
Mm,
on Amazon and anywhere books are sold. It's easy to find. It's on audiobook if you like audiobooks. I like audiobooks. I'm easy to find. I'm Robert DeLena, DeLena, Facebook, Instagram, X, wherever. The better follow, however, is Ryan. Follow
yeah,
Ryan. Ryan is much more interesting than I am. His life is much more interesting. He goes to cool places and does cool things. He's extreme underscore Ryan underscore DeLena, DeLena on Instagram. Also, Ryan DeLena on Facebook. Subscribe. It doesn't cost anything, and you'll see some cool places and cool content. But if you have questions about the book or parenting stuff, I'm really easy to find. You can reach out to me in any format, and I'll reply. I promise.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Robert. This has really been amazing and eye-opening. Your story is
Thanks.
powerful and a reminder that sometimes the right path isn't the one laid out by the experts. It's the one forged with love, instinct, and courage. Through scaling, adventure, and steadfast advocacy, Robert and Ryan show us that how freedom, trust, and passion can transform a child's life and a parent too.